Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome all of you from different countries and from different time zones. This is my pleasure to host you here as a Lela Machaidze with the partnership of Project Management Institute Tbilisi, Georgia chapter. The interest of Agile sector has been increasing for the late years. PMI chapter has, with the partnership with the Lithuania chapter, found a person who is the practitioner and implemented Agile in public sector. My name is Lela Machaidze. I am project management professional and I'm in this field for more than 70 years. I am initiator, founder, and the current president of Project Management Institute Tbilisi chapter. Couple words about the logistics of today's session. The presentation will take about 45 minutes, followed by the 15 minutes Q&A session. You will be able to post your questions in the chat section and we will address them after the presentation. The meeting will be recorded and posted on the YouTube channel on the chapter page as well as my personal page. Also, for those who are not English savvy, you can use the interpretation service. So at the right low corner, there is interpretation button. You can switch the language and you can hear the interpretation in Georgian language. So this is my pleasure and honor to present Alexey Kovalyov, who is known as a person who implemented and initiated Agile at the public sector. He is the one who actually participated in the policy making regarding the Agile, and he participated in different strategic development and transformational projects. This is real honor to host him on this session and talk about challenges, the practical tips and tricks, how Agile can be implemented in the public sector. So, Alexey, how are you today?
Thank you. I'm absolutely fine and I'm honored to be on this call. Thank you for finding me. In order to be fully correct, I am not the only one who contributed to the Agile, how to say, legalization in public sector in Lithuania, but yes, I contributed to that quite a lot and continue contributing. So we have, as you can see on the slide already, we have association called Agile Lietuva. We founded it about 10 or 11 years ago. This is a community of practice. It's just an association, voluntarily association of professionals, not companies. So we just conduct different meetups, events, and contribute to the knowledge sharing and agilization of the Lithuania, including the public sector.
Amazing. So this is the same as PMI chapter does for Georgia concerning the project management awareness and project managers networking in Georgia as well. So it's very nice to have a chance to talk with the colleague.
Okay.
Okay, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So let me start. So that's me. Just a bit about myself and like a couple of words at who I am. And I spent all my life in IT. So I was working in IT in all possible roles, starting from, tester and documentation writer. And also I was managing companies. I was managing departments, etc., and changed kind of set of logos in my life, and in different industries as well. Related to the topic today, actually, I was working even in public sector in the Lithuanian Post. You can see the logo here, and I practically tried all these tips and tricks about the agile organization, both inside of the public sector or IT public procurement, etc., etc. So everything I say is practically tested and really working. Not always, but working. My main job is big program manager or director. I work in EIS group. We create kind of big platforms for insurance companies. Main target is enterprise clients in the North America markets or in Australia, Asia, etc. Recently, we opened Europe as well. So that's my main program. It's of course agile program. Just to give a brief information about the scale, it's about 200, 300 people and 35 teams, and we are working on the same cadences, and we really have our own adaptation of the scaled agile, which somehow remains safe maybe, but not fully. So, and we are considering maybe either safe, but with some less elements, if that says to you anything. So yes, that's what I'm doing actually even today in Ukraine, where we have one of our branches. So that's about me. And today we'll speak about first of all history and how did we come to agile in Lithuanian public sector. What were the basic principles there and the first steps or mandatory steps for making it legal and actually spread and supported in public sector. Some practical recommendations for IT procurement, if time allows, and summary and Q&A. I think that will be the most fun and most interesting part to answer to your questions. And please challenge me. I like disputes. I like challenges. That will be, I think, quite interesting. So, how did we come to that in Lithuania? First of all, if we need to introduce any kind of discipline of management, not necessarily agile, but mainly like project management, we need to understand who are the key contributors there or key authorities for the policy making or recommendations making and the centers of influence, let's call it that way. In our case, that is a government office. We have also public procurement office. I think every country has. What is special for IT? Because anyway, I am a strong believer that agile is mainly targeted to IT. I know that there is a lot of the more and more popular ideas that agile is applicable everywhere. I am not strong supporter of that, and we can speak about that during Q&A. Third, and the key, really important authority in Lithuania is Information Society Development Committee. It can be called other way in any other country, but this is the committee or organization responsible for public sector IT standards, policies. Now they are even responsible or contribute to consolidation of public sector IT, etc. And they issue different recommendations about how IT systems need to be managed, what is the life cycle, what is the project management disciplines should be applied, etc., etc. So previously they were, now they are under Economy and Innovation Ministry, previously under another ministry. We have kind of big transformation in public sector during the recent years related to IT consolidation. So eventually all IT responsibilities land beyond Economy and Innovation Ministry. I'm giving that information just for you if you think like, okay, who can be that in my country? It's in different countries. This is there are no single template or pattern for that, but usually it's something somehow related to ministries of economy, of course, or sometimes even dedicated ministry level organizations like government CIO office or something like that. So we have these key players. They issue different policies regulating IT systems lifecycle and projects and public procurement. And the story looked exactly like that. So before 2014, Agile was officially prohibited. So it was not prohibited, but it was not allowed. And in public sector, if you, as you will understand, if something is not explicitly allowed, meaning it is prohibited or not really welcomed. I remember times when if some vendor want to be really progressive and put the word agile in the proposal, that proposal is being declined just because it's not following recommendations or recommended methodologies of the Information Society Development Committee. So we founded Agile Lithuania, Agile Lithuania in 2010, I think. And after a few years of just like developing the community or conducting different meetups or sharing knowledge among the mostly private sector companies or product companies, they were in the big interest of at that time, or their first were a big interest of all these innovative management approaches. We decided to focus on the public sector, and eventually it was me who was one of the key contributors to that initiative, together with other colleagues and from the association. So we get in touch with this committee. We proposed a number of adjustments and existing recommendation for the IT systems, governmental or state level systems and registries management, life cycle, etc. We identified where to put the agile and how to put it. We worked in it was quite interesting experience. It was joint work with the committee representatives, with some universities even, because we had not only introduced agile, we had to formalize that in the legal, juridical language aligned with academies, etc., etc. That's how legal acts are being produced, and eventually it was produced, and we have updated life cycle methodology in 2014, and that became the cornerstone and foundation for all the further recommendations or guidelines produced either by Information Society Development Committee or by some other authorities. For example, recently, Public Procurement Office is also actively contributing to formulation of the how to purchase IT assets or projects, etc. And of course, how contracts or the RFPs, proposals, tenders need to be shaped to be aligned with this methodology and allow agile insight. So it was this methodology. Then in the next year there was usability methodology. Actually, this is called ergonomics, user ergonomics improvement, etc. That also had some agile, because it was demanding to produce the prototypes and some working intermediate versions and conducting usability studies based on those intermediate versions, which also is impossible to achieve without agile. Then there was a really good and really important package of the documents of recommendations how to buy the consulting services for the governance of the project, because it is at least in Lithuania, we still not all organizations are able to conduct such a complex thing as IT procurement, especially if it comes to the big systems or services, etc. So if they have no internal skills or capabilities or just capacity, like everybody is busy, one of the approaches is that they procure the services for the governance. That's called in Lithuania like governance of some system. And the consultants, external consultants, help to formulate the procurement documents, to prepare all the specifications, assist the purchasing organization during the tender, and then usually they stay as one of the project committee members just to control like everything is following the contract, following the specifications, etc. So in this package of the recommendations in the year 17, there was again a lot of agile and very well structured, like even recommendations when to do agile projects and when maybe not, etc., etc. And how to, that was the moment when the shape of recommendations how to prepare procurement documents started to appear in some official guidelines. We also, meanwhile, we had our government office decided to establish stronger project management discipline in the office on the ministry level, and they established officially the PMO, project management office with some and with Lithuanian standards for the project management. It has no agile, but that's because it's PMI based, and because it's targeted to the biggest ministry level programs. So there is a portfolio management, project management, office activities, all those committees, and it's okay or almost okay to have no agile there because it's a high level programs, and they are not actually related to the physical delivery. This is mostly about the budgeting and different activities, including legalizations, organizational transformation, etc., etc. And just recently, as I mentioned, we started cooperating with Public Procurement Office quite actively. We even had some joint events under umbrella of Agile Lithuania, where we presented recommendations for IT procurement. I call them unofficial because they are not signed and published as a legal act, but these recommendations are quite actively supported by Public Procurement Office, and they follow them just for their own understanding, because they have to control all public procurements. And of course, IT is one of quite specific activities, and you also need to have skills to control and ensure the transparency and the competition in the IT sector. You need to understand how to control. So that's why they are very actively, they are interested stakeholder in all these initiatives and understanding just for themselves to complete their function and also to improve the procurement overall. Agile, why I'm speaking so much about policies and procurement, etc. Because without that, Agile can be done only undercover. I will tell you how to do it, but it's not real Agile, and it's we will lose half of the possible benefits which can Agile delivery bring to public sector. It's possible. I have done that myself, and many of the early starters did that themselves, like this Agile undercover. But if you really want to have an Agile project, it needs to be supported by the proper procurement arrangement, by the proper contracting arrangement, and legally valid according to the established standards, recommendations, methodologies, etc. if they are present in the public sector. So that's the story. These are the links, and the last link is exactly our public event of where we presented these recommendations for IT procurement. I will provide some highlights from that presentation during today's event as well. What is actually recommended there? So that's quite academical and very boring document, to be honest. These recommendations for the life cycle management, but it's just no-brainers that there are different phases, kind of standard one of the life cycle of the system, and how to prepare. This initiation is mostly about budgeting, planning, procurement organization, etc., operations, modernization, etc. Agile is only in the green box where we implement something, because there we need to follow some IT project management discipline, and we need to have a variety of tools there to choose the proper methodology which is aligned with the needs or with the specifics of the project. I'm not saying that Agile is good always, etc. And we will see later that where to apply Agile, where you don't need to apply Agile, and don't need even to bother about the project management in some cases. Very brief and very short explanation, like what is actually recommended. It's like questions like, is the scope big? Yeah, it's not really defined what is big, but you can feel it. If it's big, is it modular, like it's like split by pieces? Maybe it's big, but it consists of the different fragments which can be accepted and used separately. If it's modular, there is some alternative approach called modular. Please don't ask me a lot about that. It's actually almost the same Agile, but they call it modular approach. Agile called officially iterative incremental approach. And if it's not modular, big scope, not modular, use Agile. Maybe the scope is not big. Is it good, well defined? If no, use Agile. If your scope is small enough, if it's well defined, do waterfall. It's the simplest approach for the clear scope implementation, and you don't need to establish all those Agile rituals and activities. In other recommendations, this big was actually defined that the phase of procurement and implementation takes more than 6 months, which practically every system, every bigger system in the public sector means falls into the formulation about big and not well defined. So practically, yes, we'll have like variety of methodologies in the life cycle, but for the most of the cases, for the most of the critical national level systems and registers, it's clear that Agile is most recommended because it's really hard to achieve the well-defined status during the procurement, and it's really hard to fit into the few months of implementation if you're doing anything serious. We have some pictures explaining, so that actually this was prepared by the Agile Lithuania volunteers, like just additional, because those legal documents, as I mentioned, they're quite complex and hard to read and quite boring, to be honest. So we just prepared some illustrations explaining the difference of these methodologies. For example, in first line is waterfall, this is modular, this is iterational, incremental means agile. So how you need to arrange the activities like analysis, design, the gray line is analysis, orange is design, this is implementation, construction, testing, and deployment. In the modular approach, you see like this is a series of the mini waterfalls. You split the big scope to the clearly usable or acceptable models. They stop being big, they start being small, and they are quite well defined, assumingly. And then you can do this mini waterfall here. It's the really efficient approach. If not, then start doing all these activities in parallel. Actually, this is one of the key questions, like how we need to arrange, where is the, when analysis finishes? Never. Almost never analysis finish. And the same about design, and the same about construction. And deployment starts from the very start of the project. That's the essential. If you don't start deploying at the start or early enough in the Agile project, then you will have really bad life at the end of the project, because you will discover that you cannot deploy it like at all. Another picture, just of course these pictures are a bit propaganda, or not a bit. We are Agile Lithuania, so that's why it's obvious that we are saying that Agile is brings happiness to the users. This is about the usability or acceptance and usability of the intermediate results. You cannot use this, you cannot use this, yes. And the idea of Agile, like every time you can use it. That is actually the toughest task for any Agile project, to identify these increments, the releases, which produce really something usable, not just reports, not just something is done there, but nobody can use it, but the structuring of the plan called backlog in the way that you accumulate some user valuable functionality and you put it for the user. So user can do at least some simplified scenarios, maybe even in production, or ideally in production. For example, we have company with some processes which need to be automated or digitalized. So we cover one process, we put it in production. All processes stay the same. Then one more process plus changes to the first one. And every time that goes to the usage, and the real users start using it, not just project committee controls the iterations. If that's not happening, project is not really agile. Yes, this is about change introduction, because actually, again, obvious that in Agile, if you, one thing is acceptance or review of the documents or some reports. Another thing, if you are reviewing or testing the actual product. When testing actual product, you have better feedback, and you understand that you have wrong product and you need to do something with that product on top or instead, or change anything, etc. And structure of agile product and good agile contract should allow introduce such kind of change, because that's kind of inevitable. Yeah, and documentation, another popular question, like when we should document everything. Again, the same answer as for deployment, all the time. Documents are live artifacts. They should live for all the time. If somebody says that agile, oh, we do agile because we don't need documentation, no, it's very wrong. You need to have documentation all the time. That's supposed to be definition of done. Question, how much documentation depends on actually what are you doing. If you have heavily regulated control or officially, if your product and it's going to full production or delivery to users requires a lot of documentation, then that need to be part of the plan. But you don't need to do documentation just for documentation. That need to be either some pass for the authorities, for the legalization, usage instructions, design documents for the further stages, etc., etc. And yeah, that was 2014. We opened the door, the Pandora box, but demons didn't want to to spread from that box. Eventually, it was really slow start, and like for 6 years of the okay, why 6? Yeah, for 4 years of the agile, of the legalized agile, we only had about 6 projects, mostly delivered by, actually they were delivered by the kind of influensive agencies, like for example tax agency, and produced a really important system. So we started collecting these case studies, and every year we have either some unplanned or monthly events, but every year we have a annual event. We call it Agile Breakfast for the public sector. Before pandemic, we actually made it as a breakfast with food. to to bring more folks and listen about agile stories. And every time we also, not speaking only us, we invite public sector representatives to tell about their projects, their challenges, how they did some system, etc., etc. So that was slow start. Then it was accelerating, and just in 1 year after that, we have 10 projects already. And this is stats only about, these are statistics are only about state level systems. So it was impossible for us to gather information about the smaller projects, etc. State level systems means really national level systems, which are being controlled by the, at least supervised by the mentioned Information Society Committee, and they fall under all those official legislation and policies, how to manage systems and how to support them, etc., about life cycle. Unfortunately, I don't have fresh stats, but participation every year is very active in those events. And we, for example, this year, we also had this Agile breakfast online this time without food. So we had even 4 speakers from the public sector telling their stories about some key systems and registries and how they implemented that in Agile way, and how Agile in some cases practically saved the project, which was in really bad shape. Key challenges. Yes, of course, there are challenges, and as with any transformation, challenges are always in place. Even if it's legalized, and even if it's recommended, this is a key word, recommendations. Recommended doesn't mean mandatory. It would be faster if somebody would say mandatory. No skills, lack of skills, lack of motivation, no direct order. That the direct orders and the strong policies are the most active drivers of the things happening in the public sector. That's in the nature of that kind of hierarchical structures and lots of controlling authorities. So you need to follow the rules. And if rules are not defined or disallow you to do something, you better not do anything. That's I'm not criticizing public sector. It's supposed to be in that way. There must be proper rules and proper recommendations. Controlling authorities are not always agile friendly. They also need these papers. They need them because they are controlled by paper, they control by the policies. So there must be some policy allowing them to control and say, yes, that is aligned. And in every public sector, I'm sure there are plenty of controlling authorities, starting from the public procurement office or maybe some other controlling authorities, depending on the industry or arrangement. High level of transparency and control forced to take care about paper safety first. That's what I mentioned. So every organization in public sector are under huge, constant surveillance by citizens, by controlling authorities, by legal authorities, etc. So first of all, they take precautions, or they have to take care about the paperwork, and project delivery is somehow going to the second plan. Because if you do the project not by paper, or if something is wrong with the contracting, procurement, legal acts, etc., then there will be no victory anyway, and you will be punished for that. Lack of clear IT procurement recommendations. Yeah, we came up with these improved recommendations later. We were presenting them on our events quite actively, starting, I would say, 15th year or maybe 16th year. But only now when I noticed that we have strong support and contribution from the public procurement office, these recommendations for contracting and how to buy agile started being used. So again, find those influencers in your public sector and align with them, help them to formulate this and empower them to spread the message. If you just conduct the lectures and the breakfasts, that's usually not happening. Of course, there are always some enthusiasts who take that and try, etc. But you should not expect that there will be too many enthusiasts in any public sector. That's not in definition of it. Another very important driver, everybody often speaks about public sector, like how they're very conservative or very defensive, etc., lack of skills. I always say, like, vendors are absolutely not interested in any agile. Vendors who work with public sector know how to make business in public sector, and they're making good business in public sector in the waterfall. So it's not in their interest to optimize projects. It's not in their interest to introduce the intermediate controls, put themselves at risk that if they fail to deliver something, the project will be not paid, not canceled, etc. So it's fortunately they are not, at least not in Lithuania, they were not empowered enough to put some barriers here, but definitely they were not supportive. And of course, there are some big companies in every market working with public sector, and how they sell, that's the way how public sector buys, unless public sector have some mandatory commands to buy it in another way. Lack of knowledge, of course, is there, but as I already mentioned, if you lack knowledge, you can buy consultants. It's covered by the recommendations. And the key knowledge, which is usually not in place, is just lack of any kind of project management discipline and skills. And Agile is a subset of the project management. You need to be manager. You need to be able to understand what the project is, what is the essence, what is the life cycle of the system is. And then you can choose waterfall, agile, whatever. If you don't have this foundational knowledge or people capacity to cover this, then nothing will help. It definitely, that's not helping to experiment with the innovative approaches. Yeah, so first of all, as I mentioned, if you want to introduce Agile in the public procurement and in the public sector, take care about procurement first. Nothing will be in place if procurement cannot be conducted in that way. First of all, it's project. Second, it's Agile. For example, one of the favorite methodologies is a PMG International. Recently, they were famous only for Prince2, but actually they have lots of other methodologies, including Agile Project Management. I like that the most because it's very simple and very illustrative. So this is the typical shape of the bigger project. As you see, it's still waterfall in somehow.
Alexey, don't forget that we have PMI chapter here.
I understand. So I'm provoking you. I brought some competitor. Unfortunately, I didn't study PMI officially, so that's why I cannot speak about it. I speak only about what I studied. But I think based on what I saw and what I heard, it's now it's mostly the same. So we need to understand that there must be project management, governance, control. There must be understanding why we need this agile, not just because it's it's a new fashion or it's so popular or we want to look fancy. It's because we need to manage the risks and changes. In every government sector projects, there will be changes, both internal and external. Externally, some new legal acts can pop up any moment. Some European Union or some other countries can change or influence the scope of the public sector system. Just internally, not everything was well defined, so you will find it out, etc., etc. So there must be a shape of project which allows a lot of change management. It should not be treated as an evil. That's inevitable. You cannot treat this as a scope creep or in some kind of something bad if it's clear to everyone, honestly, that there will be change. That's one thing. Second thing is you need to do agile for the intermediate results, practical control. So otherwise, you will see it only at the end of the project, and you will be in a really bad position to change anything, or for example, to change the scope or take some corrective actions because project will be close to over. And especially if you need to establish the closer contribution of your users or some experts from the public sector, then Agile is a really good approach for the joint teams. Unfortunately, this is not always done, not always conducted, and not always valued. But if organization understands that, then all these three elements are the real justification for the Agile. Any big project, any really complex program can be shaped into or can use Agile inside, or it needs to be shaped over it. So it's even if we have multiple streams, multiple projects, etc. That's actually the typical scheme of our projects in EIS group when we deliver our big insurance platform to some client. There are always multiple streams, some delivered by us, some delivered by partners, some delivered by themselves, but we run them all through the same cadences, sprints, for the same cadences of the releases, and they exchange results, and that's actually very healthy because these time boxed cadences and alignment between the streams introduce possibility to make dependencies management more transparent and clear, and exchange intermediate results to check each other. And yeah, so it's early validation of interstream dependencies. In any bigger project, it's very recommended to have Agile because it's very risky to wait for the end, especially if multiple vendors or multiple streams deliver some results. Then at the end, you will find out that they're not working together. That's why I mentioned that deployment starts from the start of the project, because it's a traditional situation and the system works on my machine. But if I bring that to some environment, to client environment, that's suddenly not being deployed, not working, and nobody knows why. So early exchange of the results, early deployment into production-like environments is a great benefit. It's all about risk management. That decreases risk. If we have set of teams, multiple teams of small size working on the different parts on different streams, we can still produce kind of traditional reports out of that. We just need to know the rules, how they live in those sprints, what are those cadences, and this is just example. I apply very similar burn downs. Okay, actually it's burn up charts to control all my teams in my program and see the deviations of the milestone scope, this dark blue line, the structure of the sprints, stability of the sprints, it's a light blue line, and the red line is like, how do they cover it? How do they cover it? And you can accumulate all that if especially you use some kind of task management, project management system like Jira or something like that. You can produce all kind of even traditional reports based on that, while the very teams are working by agile sprints and deliver intermediate results. Why you need to do that? As explained on this picture, you collect it all. You have the transparency how everybody is handling their part. You can take corrective actions. You can manage the risk and change on the go. If you don't have agile contract with intermediate acceptances, you can still do agile undercover, as I mentioned. So, for example, and I did it, it fit very well. And I will explain the reasons for that, why you need to do this agile undercover. So this is a traditional contract structure. Like we start soon enough, but after some period, bring us a lot of documentation. We accept documentation, accept designs. Then after some big part of time, systems should be deployed. Very fast after that, users trained. Quite fast after that, UAT passed, and project sign off and goes to operations. This wasteland in the middle, of course, there are lots of meetings, progress control, etc., but nobody actually checking the practical results. You still can agree with any client, with any organization, like, okay, contract looks like that. Contract looks like gray box with the red marks for the official signs off. But usually it's really possible to agree with the client that okay, we don't request the official sign off because that's disallowed by the contract, but we just ask you for the feedback. And usually everybody provides feedback. That feedback cannot be treated as a contractual agreement or protocol, etc., but still it is still valuable. It's much better than not getting the feedback, especially if you bring to the meeting not just reports, but working prototype or working beta version or alpha version, etc. That's already provides you with the better report and the better understanding on the client side. And moreover, they getting used to that system, how it looks, how it feels, UI, usability, etc., and that simplifies the UAT and trial usage phase heavily. I saw projects which were in really bad shape only because when the system was brought to the end users like went to the strike or sabotage that because they don't understand the system. It's too scary. It's too big change for them. There were cases when professional unions were escalating and demanding some unmounting of some systems because all those members of the professional unions were against the system. Why did it happen? Because they were not involved. They were not involved. Nobody asked them for the feedback. Nobody aligned it with their usability, with their skills, etc., etc. And that's also so. This showing the betas, even unofficially, without signing any paper, is really valuable. And contract is that way, but contract doesn't say how you should arrange your project activities. You can arrange your project activities in a completely agile way. You can see that below, like, yes, first, and you lots of effort for the backlogging, then smaller effort, smaller, but it still continues almost until the end. What can engineers do at the start of the project? They have something to do, believe me. They need to set up environments, start making the designs, at least high level. They need to create all those technical enablers, let's call it that way, like the frameworks, some constructions of the system, which will be used during the project. Then they can jump on the prototype, and practically when we bring the technical design for the sign-off, we can bring not only technical design, but some working prototype, and already start getting the feedback. And if we agree on that we are not bringing just reports, we establish this feedback loop and earlier involvement of potential users, even without official part. How to make public sector agile? Practically, I already mentioned about that. You need to, first of all, there must be skilled project management, or at least some project management in the public sector. You need to identify the influencers or authorities, agencies who are responsible or at least influential for this area. You can establish collaboration with them if they have their own skills or capacity. I think it's really, in these days, it's becoming more and more popular, this cooperation between communities of practice, some volunteers, work groups, etc., and such authorities to prepare those documents, those acts, recommendations, guidelines, etc., and conduct some pilot projects together. Then ideally, if it's succeeded and if it's approved, then it's possible then to allocate the budgets for trainings and run the at least key ministries and key agencies through the trainings of the project management and etc. When we have project management, we can either after or immediately we can introduce agile as well, because then there is a general understanding of the project management and risk management and the change management, etc. And agile is one more tool how to conduct some category of projects, establishing the better change and risk management. So it's not about some, it should not be taken as a question of fashion or religion, etc., etc. It's a very pragmatical approach. If you see the chances that you will have problems with change management and risk management or user acceptance, Agile is your friend, because that's the tool to mitigate these risks. Key factors of success: strong support from responsible authorities, alignment with control authorities. Don't forget about them. Sometimes they're there and they're hidden, and maybe you don't know who they are, but they are. And the procurement organizations know them very well. Transparency and collaboration with market players, communities of practice. For example, we have also Association of IT Organizations in Lithuania, Infobalt. We are also members of that Infobalt as our Agile Lithuania. We contribute there, and we even have their work groups working on the same recommendations for IT procurement, etc., etc. And yeah, help create first success studies, and preferably from some influencer for at least well-known ministries or government office. Better to have the first case studies on some easy to understand for the wider market systems or e-services, like some project which create something which can kind of wide variety of citizens can use, or in the variety of organizations can use, and that influence both makers, users, and policymakers. Practical recommendations. Do we have time still? Oh,
actually, your presentation is so breathtaking. Actually, I know what you have more, and I think this practical is very important. So please go ahead, and we will take the questions and address them, because I'm sure your presentation will answer other questions as well, which are arising. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, I will try to be a bit faster. Agile, what is Agile IT procurement? First of all, it's IT procurement, like Agile project management. First of all, is project management, And second, agile. Then in agile IT procurement, first of all, you need to understand how to buy IT and what is IT procurement, and then you can ask a question how to make some of these procurements agile. It's about the procurement object definitions. In every tender, there need to be clear definition. What are you buying? There need to be contractual characteristics and what makes agile IT procurement agile contract, which foresees phased delivery by some or by some cadences, requirements to produce some intermediate working or at least usable or testable versions, not just progress reports. Phased delivery for operations, meaning that some pieces of the system can be in the production already and under support, while other parts of the system are still in development and will be released on top. Beyond the transparency requirements, like what kind of reporting, what kind of those burn downs, etc., and backlogs we need to establish to jointly access and see how it's about all those agile rituals. Change management process need to be defined and aligned, like if change in the scope occurs. So what is the process of approval is put into the backlog or planning to some sprints, etc., and how you will cover that. Is it part of the fixed price? Is it part of the additional time and material services, etc. Control points, and especially if you have big program, there must be very clear rules for the inter-stream, cross-stream exchanges of the intermediate results, and also cross-stream transparency, especially if you're dealing with multiple vendors or some parties responsible for the delivery. There are a lot of, when we say IT procurement, it sounds simple, but it's not. It's actually a whole variety of stuff which can be purchased, starting from communication services like internet or telecom, hosting services, hardware, licenses, etc., etc. So none of this great. They're not agile is not applicable there. They're just goods. Lowest price win. It's quite simple. You need to know how to formulate requirements for them for sure, because they are very specific and they are absolutely different. But the real project management happens in these two bullets. When we buy projects to implement some solution or modernize it, and when we are buying some just services or some specialists, some skill sets to accomplish, or like staffing augmentation, or to work under some work order conditions, etc. You will find in my presentation some structured recommendation how to choose the way of procurement. Again, big, small project, etc. You need to ask these questions to identify what procurement is good for you, what structure to follow, what the procurement documents to prepare. And we need to differ the big project procurement from the support and extension services procurement, when you just buy services, but you don't, and here you know scope, here you don't know scope. You're allowed to not put it into the procurement documents. How to make decision about procurement overall? Actually, this is the key questions you need to answer. If you are a procurement organization, like do we know what to do? Do we know how to do it? Are we able to manage it, etc., etc. The more you can, the simpler procurement you can apply. You can just really apply like staffing augmentation, procurement, special services, some skill sets, headcounts, and time and materials, etc., etc. If you lack any of this, then here you should buy consultants. Here you need to buy the big project. Here you can have simplified procurement of the work order-based delivery of support and extensions. Big project procurement. Of course, it covers, you need to break your head and think about the vendor qualification, economic efficiency. Actually, in Lithuania, it's recommended for all bigger projects to apply some economic efficiency evaluation, some ratios. I don't know about other countries. But there are even recommendations that price should be, for the complex and risky project or some national level, price should not be more than, I don't know, 50 or 40% of that evaluation. Because big solutions, the costs they produce are not only defined by the projects. There is a total cost of ownership. And this is, by the way, one of the toughest tasks to formulate this economic efficiency evaluation in the public tender, especially if you want to foresee and evaluate this total cost of ownership, or how it will be after deployment and operations, when you will need to buy something on top, etc., etc. So it's not just, it's need to go beyond the project horizon. And usually it's formulated quite challenging, let's call it that way. Procurement object. I recommend to have procurement object of 3 parts. We can see them here. It's the fixed price, the solution. It's a fixed price, but it's paid in staged way based on the intermediate version's acceptance. You need to have a good buffer for additional services, because you will have extensions and changes on the go, etc. And this can be run through the as a series of the work orders. And support. By support, I mean when something is in operations, in the production, then there must be support. And support, I recommend to pay for that separately. And all of these 3 items need to be proposed, managed differently, and paid differently and separated. There is an opinion that, okay, if vendor created a system for us, then he must provide a warranty for some years, etc. It's his responsibility. I think this is an illusion. And if vendor is not paid for the operations, then he will not provide support. So there need to be this carrot and the stick thing, that if system is in the production, etc., and especially if it's in production and vendor continues developing it, some new version, then you need to separate these payments. In other ways, the vendor will have to use the same team, both for support and for development, and one or another of these will suffer. So let's go back. Procurement object, technical specification. Tough work to prepare the well-structured technical specification, phases, all those intermediate releases, etc., and which means acceptance and payment, and etc., etc. This is those services which we buy the bucket of the hours and skills, just in case we need something. Just in case something really changes according to the initial scope, or you clarify something. It is not buffer to be used just because vendor is delaying. It's a buffer to be used if you have change. You produce new requirements, or some legal act change it, or some external party changed something. And this is a bucket for I speak about this one. This is the bucket to be used only in these cases based on some special additional work orders. Qualification requirements depend on the country, etc., but the general recommendation, ensure competition. Even if you have some preferred vendors, then competition good. It impacts the prices, it provides a variety of options. And there is a general trend, at least in Lithuania, to ensure and unlock the small and medium businesses to participate. So public procurement should not be only a big boys club for just a few companies. Actually, this was in all countries which we studied during this Agile introduction to public sector. For example, in UK, that was specifically one of the targets on the country level by the Prime Minister, enablement of the small business to participate in IT projects. And before that, some initiatives with the digital office in UK, they were I saw the map, this is a UK, and these are the map of vendors who contribute to public sector IT. Just a few those huge companies, those biggest one. And this is This is the map of vendors at the end of that initiative, and then the other after all these changes, like all the UK map covered with the dots of the different companies, startups, sometimes, etc., etc. I understand that we all want to have safety and have the really skilled and established vendor, because there are definitely risks with that. But overall trend is and recommendation to enable smaller vendors participate, enable competition, and do not overreact setting the requirements and barriers. One of the important topic is if it's possible, demand dedicated SMEs, experts, take some at least actions starting this qualification phase to ensure that vendor indeed has some experts and not just CVs. That's a usual practice. Then for the tender, everybody brings some set of nice CVs, and you never see these people in the project. And that's starting from this part. Economic efficiency, already mentioned. This is just an example. How can it be aligned? Like price is smaller, different technical and future economical benefits, high ratio. What can be evaluated there? Solution vision, how creative and practical vendor was preparing the proposal. Then solution architecture efficiency and openness for the change. You will use the system many years, and it need to be open. It need to be a possibility to pass this system to some other vendors, maybe, or involve partners, or create something on top. Total cost of ownership can be evaluated here as well. Added value is if you cannot put something as a mandatory requirements, put them here. For example, it's really bad practice to have a huge list of requirements which are treated as the same priority. And even if they are not treated as the same priority, then if you put them into RFP and specification, then they are on the same priority, because this is a legal document. And if some requirement or some additional stuff, lower priority stuff will be not delivered, meaning that project is not complete. You can put this added value stuff or lower priority but beneficial capabilities here in this evaluation, and just give more points to the vendors who is able to satisfy or provide solution for some additional functionality. Yes, so there is no single written in stone criteria template. This is really creative part and need to be adapted and adjusted for your needs and the life cycle and the future of the specific solution. But that's really important. As you see, nothing about Agile here. I spoke about procurement objects. What will be interesting here? So this is how Agile contract and the specifications should look like. This is that phased approach. You can define it, and I recommend to focus more to put your business processes into specification. Don't go into detail requirements. Put the high-level processes and map these processes to the phases. Like, okay, after first version, we want to have covered processes ABC. Then
these are more detailed phases that you are describing, right, Alexey?
No, it's like first version. I will not accept anything unless you bring me the system.
I mean, the phases that you have described, these are more the details, like what it's really interesting. And I hate to interrupt you, but we have already reached our limit, and I know that there are more to talk about this, and I know that our attendees would like to take some questions.
Let's do it. Sorry.
Let's do it if you are okay with this.
I'm absolutely okay.
The first question, probably I will be the actually the question that I have: how many agencies and what are the best known agencies in Lithuania you know that have already implemented this approach?
Tens, probably, because it's like it's based on the participants on our Agile events, and because we have presenters from these agencies, and at least for sure I know this is the public procurement office themselves, They will now run their big projects in this way. It's tax agencies, it's a center of registers, it's Lithuanian Post where I worked in, and I think so some other organizations as well.
So as I know, the policy making, IT obviously also can be considered, HR can be, as a function, can be considering the agile approach in the public sector as well. So not only on I mean, the functions can be also implemented, not only in the IT function. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
The cornerstone which I hear, and as it started in 2014, so all these initiatives started in 2014, that it should start with legalizing. Yeah. And I see lots of participants from the authority representatives in Georgia, like State Audit Office, who are the authority, who are really the one who are checking the controlling the projects and programs. So in your experience, are those authorities also partially agile, not everything? As we see, there are modular, there are waterfall. Are those also trying to be agile?
Yes, actually, this Information Society Committee, they also own some systems, and recently they are also conducting their projects in this way. Yeah. So practically, recently, every time I see anybody who approaches me for consulting, I see more and more. Practically, it became a standard now that even without understanding what is agile, everybody is now putting the name like a project need to be agile, etc. So actually, this is snow avalanche effect. Like you start from some study cases, more, and suddenly everybody is copying from each other. In public sector, everybody is copying from each other because systems somehow similar or etc. approaches. So they just take one from each other. If agile is there, the higher frequency of agile appearance in the procurement requirements, the wider spread of the agile.
Actually, you had one topic there mentioning that the key success factor is having agency or ministry or public sector representative also having buy-in on this and believing in this, supporting it in this. So actually, who were the leaders, thought leaders of those who push this? Because this is change. I admit that initially when I thought agile in public sector, I was so skeptical. I said, it never gonna work. But when I see it in reality, oh my God, it's so efficient. So who are those who are driving those change from the public agency side?
In our case, that was okay. After summer elections, there was a change of the faces in the ministries, etc. And especially when the minister or some higher authority officer comes from the private sector or from diverse experience, they started wondering like, why I don't know some practices of management which I got used to, and they become those strongest influencers personally, or at least those shakers of all these topics, and that is a very good time to introduce something, because if especially you will have some minister or some other authority, some secretary of something with the background from the EMBA or from private sector, etc., etc. This is our client to come and speak to, because they know this value, they believe in that, and they can impact, maybe not directly, maybe it's not their agency responsible, but they can support this idea, speaking to the responsible agencies who are policymakers. That's particularly what's happening in Lithuania.
Yeah, I see. And it's so interesting because I think we will be going through this process in the nearest future. So it's really interesting. And We exceeded our time, and I see the notes from the participants that the topic was so interesting that they are requesting another session. So I'm taking you, if you will be available for another session, we can do another session, because there are so much to cover and there is so much interest in this topic that we can do another session. So I'm looking for the questions. I saw the question from Barak about risks, but you addressed later it. Barak, thank you for being active and posting the links and the notes. Thank you for that. Yes, in the cases, stakeholder management has to have the great importance too. Yes, right, Barak. I think we will finish with that today's session, even though I have a list of the tons of questions, but time is limited. And I would like to thank you, all the participants who were interested in this topic. We will be sharing the YouTube link and to those who are registered. And Alexey, thank you so much for this insightful and very interesting session. I would like to ask anybody who is